Hello, critics, non-critics, and friends. Welcome to the Film Optix podcast, brought to you by the Drive-In Podcast Network, where we discuss film, TV, and all things Hollywood here on the show. I'm your host, Christian, and I was supposed to be joined by two co-hosts today, but one of them had an emergency, so I guess I'll have to settle with Brendan Cassidy from In Session Film. How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing well. Unfortunately, JD wasn't able to back me up on our feelings of Deathly Hallows Part 1. I'll have to do all the heavy lifting here, but I'm doing very well. It's great to be back. Last time I was here was when Matt and I joined you to talk about the Chamber of Secrets, and even that feels like so long ago.
Yes, it does.
I keep forgetting how long this series actually is.
Yeah, and I didn't really, it's like, obviously you know that, but when I decided to do this, I'm like, oh crap, there's 8 movies. And I'm like, okay, like, what am I going to do here? But like, it does, we know the story so well.
Yeah.
We can just blow through it.
I know. Sometimes they don't even require rewatches for some of us because they're almost embedded into our minds. I will say I am slightly disappointed that I wasn't asked first to join the Half-Blood Prince review.
I'm so sorry. I totally forgot.
It's all good.
Oh my gosh.
I think you guys had a great conversation on it. It was you, Amanda, and Shurya, I believe he was. And he had some, as you put it, controversial takes on Half-Blood Prince, many of which I do agree with. So I'll simply say that it was really, really great to hear you guys talk about it.
Yeah, next time when the 40th anniversary comes around.
Yeah, by the time when you have new listeners, and we're walking around with canes.
Yeah, we're like
instead of magic wands.
We're like 40, 50 years old. It's like, all right, guys, it's time to do another rewatch.
Yep.
But before we begin today, everyone out there listening, this is our continuation celebration of 20 years of movie magic with our Harry Potter movie series review. Of course, with the Deathly Hallows Part 1. And before we begin today's show, you can listen to our podcast on platforms around the internet. And if you're a new or seasoned listener to the show, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram at Film Optix. That is Optix with an X. Before we get into our Deathly Hallows Part 1 review, because forgot how long this movie was, but
oh yeah,
not gonna lie, it was. I just finished rewatching it beforehand. I wanted to ask you really, really quick for all the new listeners out there, what was your introduction to Harry Potter?
It was the first movie, actually. I did try reading the first book when the hype was just all the rage back in my elementary school days, and I couldn't really get into the book. My mind was just on so many different things. And I think when I talked about this during our Chamber of Secrets episode, I mentioned I was more into youthful mystery novels at the time. I was reading a lot of the Hardy
Jane
Boys.
Austen. I'm kidding.
Not Jane Austen. I didn't even know who that was when I was in 5th grade. But it was a lot of Hardy Boys, Tom Swift, if anyone remembers who that character was, things underneath the Edward Stratemeyer Syndicate, as it was known as. But I saw the first movie and I was hooked. It was sort of a turning point for me, and that got me into the book series. I got ahead of the movies by then reading all the books first after seeing that first movie, and the rest was history then.
Okay. Yeah, I was more of a Junie B. Jones fan myself. I liked her.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Oh, the sillier side of things.
Yeah, it's all right. I mean, I did used to read them. It was just one of those things where, I don't know, one of our teachers was like, here, like, this is something we can read as a class. And we're like,
oh, yeah.
Okay.
All that stuff was fun at that time. I even read a little bit of Nancy Drew at that age.
I did too,
but again,
yeah.
That was all part of that same syndicate I mentioned earlier. And they were playful. They were fun. They were light. There weren't many stakes to it, but that's kind of what made them great for that age demographic.
Yeah, definitely. And for those listening, I was telling Brendan here, I was missing 2 of my Harry Potter books, and I think I kind of mentioned this on the Half-Blood Prince review, but I don't agree with this whole, I mean, obviously Harry Potter is a young adult fantasy. Mm-hmm. I don't think they should be in like the kid section.
No, I think that's too superficial. There are, I mean, from a superficial standpoint, they are perhaps age appropriate for younger audiences, all 7 books, but there are underlying themes that are a bit challenging, I'll simply say. Maybe not inappropriate, but challenging. And that's something I really like about these stories.
Yeah, definitely. And I've always gravitated towards like the young like the young adult fantasy. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Golden Compass books as well. So it's, and I mean, The Witcher is a little bit more mature, but of course, then you get into things like Game of Thrones and things of that nature, or like Shadow and Bone, things like that. But yeah, I've always gravitated towards that. I haven't honestly expanded my like novel interests to a lot of other things because I kind of just stick to what I know.
It's kind of fun to do that. At the same time, whenever you go to, I don't know, even like a Barnes and Noble, for instance, you kind of find yourself going down this novel rabbit hole of sorts. And at least with someone like me, my eyes are sometimes bigger than my stomach when it comes to buying books that I just don't have time to read. I'm trying to get into a lot of classic science fiction lately. I actually just read some Arthur C. Clarke. I'm reading a little bit of Robert Heinlein right now. But that stuff is so dense that you sometimes have to reread chapters just to understand what you just read the first time. But I kind of like that. I think it's really intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, watching, I don't know, Dune Part 1 again, because I had to watch it again. Yeah. I enjoyed it the first time, but I wanted to watch it again to understand the lore. Or it's kind of like telling someone, oh, you should watch Game of Thrones. Darn well, they're not going to pick up on everything the first watch. Right. It definitely requires a rewatch. So I do like stories like that for sure.
Yeah. And speaking of Dune, that is when I am going to try and read at some point, hopefully before part 2 comes out. Honestly, what provoked me was hearing how Denis Villeneuve wants to maybe turn it into a trilogy and make that third part be Dune Messiah, the second novel in Frank Herbert's series. And hearing that, I thought, okay, this might be fun to try and get ahead of the game just to see how it feels to see something that's really big like this, but sort of know the backstory beforehand so I can judge it in a different lens.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, because I thought that he was going to turn the first book into 3 parts and then do Dune Messiah, but I guess it just depends, because much like Harry Potter Part 1 and Part 2, which kind of started this whole, book series trend, we see it with, of course, with Twilight, we saw it with Hunger Games as well. So it really does work. So are you ready to get into our Deathly Hallows Part 1 review?
Oh, yes, man, I am.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will be right back with our Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 review right after this short break.
What's wrong?
Wrong? Nothing's wrong. Not according to you, anyway.
Look, if you've got something to say, don't be shy. Spit it out.
All right, I'll spit it out. But don't expect me to be grateful just because now there's another damn thing we've got to find.
I thought you knew what you signed up for.
Yeah, I thought I did too.
Well, I'm sorry, but I don't quite understand. What part of this isn't living up to your expectations? Did you think we were going to be staying in a 5-star hotel, finding a Horcrux every other day? You thought you'd be back with your mum by Christmas?
I just thought, after all this time, we would have actually achieved something. I thought you knew what you were doing. I thought Dumbledore would have told you something worthwhile. I thought you had a plan.
I told you everything Dumbledore told me. And in case you haven't noticed, we have found a Horcrux already.
Yeah, and we're about as close to getting rid of it as we are to finding the rest of them, aren't we?
Ron, please take the Horcrux. You wouldn't be saying any of this if you hadn't been wearing it all day.
Do you know why I listen to that radio every night, dear? To make sure I don't hear Ginny's name. Or Fred. Or George. Or Mum.
What, you think I'm not listening too? You think I don't know how this feels?
Oh, you don't know how it feels! Your parents are dead! You have no family!
Stop! Stop!
Finally, go! Go then!
All right, and we are back with our Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 review. Again, we got David Yates coming back to, close out. He's been working hard, very, very hard, and we got Steve Kloves back as a writer, and of course, J.K. Rowling as the credited novelist of this amazing series. And if you don't know the stars by now, Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, Emma Watson, etc., etc. We have there's so much, and of course, now we actually found this out a few days ago. They're doing a 20-year celebration, kind of like a reunion special.
Yeah, Return to Hogwarts, I think it's called.
Yeah, I almost screamed like a schoolgirl. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like, I didn't think they would ever do anything like this. And I know Christopher Columbus has been very vocal about doing a Cursed Child.
I'm not looking forward to that if that ends up happening.
I was like,
I'm of two minds with that. Now, if they are going to do Cursed Child, as much as I love what Christopher Columbus did for the first Harry Potter film especially, I don't know if he's the right director to take it on. But I mean, I like the idea that it comes full circle in some ways. My issue is I just don't care for that story. I think the story of the Cursed Child, maybe it's better on stage. I never saw the play. But the story itself, I don't know. It gets into some of the things I think this series has not dealt with very well. So I don't know. We'll see. It might be fun.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know he's been very vocal about it, and he was kind of showing small little tidbits of the first movie, and especially how they got like all the letters into the Dursleys' house. It was like this giant like fan. Like there was no CGI whatsoever. They just dumped a bunch of letters and had this huge fan coming through the chimney, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's really clever.
I was like, wow, that's awesome. But we're here talking, Deathly Hallows part 1. Did you get a chance to rewatch it before the episode or no?
I did about almost a month ago, maybe a few weeks ago. I watched it around Halloween, and it wasn't on HBO Max. It was actually on, I think they were playing them all on Freeform for a while or something. My girlfriend and I were doing some house sitting for her parents while they were visiting her brother's family, who also lives in Tennessee. They actually live in Knoxville. So we were doing some house sitting, also dog sitting, and they happened to be playing on TV, and we just kind of had them on in the background. But Deathly Hallows Part 1, I did pay more attention to. Just there's an artfulness to it that I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And you saying Freeform, God, that remembers me the ABC Family Harry Potter weekends. I still
like to call it ABC Family.
I know, like year round, like they always had the Harry Potter weekend thing going on. People would just gather around. If you didn't have it on DVD or any kind of home video, that's where you watched it. But I definitely got a chance to rewatch Part 1, as I said earlier. And, as I've said before, I do watch these yearly. And when it comes to Part 1 of Deathly Hallows, like it came out when I was in my last year of high school as a senior. So 2010. And, that's the height of Harry Potter, like for everyone in that age bracket. And I really just like how there's, as obviously these films go on, more maturity to them, but you really just start to get the sense between Half-Blood Prince and even sometimes with Order of the Phoenix, like how serious and dark everything just kind of, it just happens all around, like the first opening scene, it's, everyone leaving their homes. You have Hermione essentially erasing her parents' mind, which is kind of, it's very depressing because, she's sacrificing so much. Everyone in Harry's life is sacrificing so much, saying, okay, this is the beginning of the end. We have to protect Harry at all costs because the Dark Lord is back. Yeah. And, he's not resting. He's on the move. And, we get that great, I think it's at Malfoy Manor during the very beginning when, with, all the Death Eaters and whatnot. And they're trying to figure out, I heard Harry's, they're moving Harry on X amount of date versus this amount of date. And then you get, Snape over there kind of being all
sneaky about it. Yeah.
He's like, oh, whose sign am I playing on? You never know.
You never know.
Yeah.
But I do like that about the film is that it does a very good job committing to the novel's sadness. And probably more so than any of its counterparts, which I really do respect about it. And David Yates does come from a very indie drama background, a very TV indie drama background. Movies like The Girl in the Cafe, for instance, a lot of them which were, I believe, made for TV movies over in England. And he's really one of those directors that, we see this a lot. We see a lot of big studios hiring indie filmmakers to take on big projects. And sometimes it yields really interesting results. Other times, not so much. But I think David Yates is one of the best examples of it because I really do feel like he brings his humanistic roots to this franchise. And I think here while it's not my favorite Harry Potter film, I think those sensibilities are on the most display in this one specifically.
Yeah, I have to agree there. It's not my favorite, but of course, it being the beginning of the end, it does set up so much. And with essentially a 2.5 hour runtime, And then I believe the last film is around 2 hours and 10 minutes. You know, them together, it tells this grand story. But there is a lot that goes on in this, but it is more poetic, I guess you could say, in a way, or more like subtle.
It is. There's an artfulness to this one. And what I like about David Yates' contributions to this franchise, not really counting Fantastic Beasts, that feels a bit more corporately mandated than what's going on here, I feel like.
Wait, is he directing did he direct Fantastic Beasts? No.
He did do those Fantastic Beasts movies, and aesthetically they do feel kind of out of place when you compare it to these movies here. But here, you know, he re-teams with different cinematographers for each outing. He has sometimes different composers. Here with part 1 of the Deathly Hallows, he's working with Eduardo Serra as his cinematographer, so it has a very different visual palette when compared to Half-Blood Prince and Order of the Phoenix. He's working with Alexandre Desplat as his composer, who is one of the best composers working today, if you ask me. And it creates this real, like, stark sense of melancholy. This is perhaps the most melancholic Harry Potter film, which is what I really like about it. I mentioned that it's not quite my favorite Harry Potter film, but it might be in my top 3. And this might be I hate controversial takes for the sake of it. I genuinely think I like this one more than part 2, if we have to separate them as experiences, primarily because, well, first off, this feels more like a part 1.5 and then part half, because like there's so much that happens in this one, whereas part 2, rightfully so, is really just the storm itself. We've got the calm before the storm and then the storm. Right. But this feels like a complete experience, even though it is only half a story, and I really like that about it. It really has something to say and feel.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. And when you said melancholy, I think that is a perfect word for it. It's more of, I believe we were talking about Batman the other day, between Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. I kind of see where, for Deathly Hallows Part 1, like you said, the calm before the storm. Part 2 is the more quote unquote entertaining bits. Yeah,
and honestly, if that was more what this movie as a whole was going for, I don't think it would have worked all that well. We have this calm to set up the devastation that we're going to get in part 2. And this is honestly one of those cases where I feel like what they're doing here as a film actually helps surpass some of the things in the novel. I feel like the novel was really J.K. Rowling so desperate to wrap this up that she just starts killing characters off left and right, and I honestly didn't really get much of a chance to feel anything for them. At least with this cinematic experience, this version, I feel the weight of those deaths a lot more heavily. And I think it's because they really take their time to relish in that sense of melancholy in this specific part here.
I definitely agree with you on the whole J.K. Rowling thing as well. During the time of the book, it was, everyone obviously wanted to know how it ended. And, there's this huge, her just like, even with like Mad Eye, like, in the movie, obviously, like you see him for, I don't know, maybe 5-6 minutes as they're trying to transport Harry, to the Weasleys. And, they just say, oh, like he's dead. And then, I think that was the only character out of all of them that kind of essentially died during the very beginning, to show obviously how serious everything is,
and really off screen as well. Now, most characters in these 2 outings, part 1 and part 2 respectively, do technically die off screen, but we actually see the ramifications of them in part 2. Mad Eye Moody's death is kind of like instantaneous and abrupt, and that's kind of what makes it weirdly more devastating. And kudos to Brendan Gleeson for only having 4 or 5 minutes of screen time, as you said, and yet he still makes him a compelling presence. What does he say when he first walks into Privet Drive? Something like, yeah, he's gorgeous. Why don't we try and just pray all over him until someone comes and murders him? It's he still gives this character a bit of a, I don't want to say an arc, but enough personality for us to feel something bad when he actually croaks.
He really, he also obviously he pushes the story forward, because he's not a very sentimental person, as you can definitely tell. And like Hagrid's like, oh, I'm the person who brought you here, and only be right for me to be the one to take her away. And he's like, yeah. Like let's move it. Let's go on. Like, the Dark Lord's out there and whatnot. And it really is kind of like, once they hit the Weasleys where, they're trying to essentially interrogate each other.
Yeah.
During that transport and R.I.P. to Hagrid, of course.
That one, yeah, that one was hard.
That was like the only on-screen death we got, like pretty much.
And it's for someone, I don't want to say someone, but for a character as innocent as Hedwig. It's like there's nothing you can do about it. Yeah.
And I really just like the, it really just, again, pushes before like the whole melancholy thing comes during the very beginning where everyone's kind of just on edge and it's like, isn't school supposed to be starting soon? And then of course you have Harry who's not of age yet because he's like essentially like the baby out of all of his friends. And so it's like, oh, you still have the trace on you. You can only use certain magical items like a broom that, aren't traceable, which they never really mentioned before in the movies, like in the previous movies, at least.
Yeah, this one does avoid certain things that are very expository. It's something I actually noticed as I was rewatching all these movies in preparation for these conversations here was how expository some of the dialogue was in the first half of this entire franchise. And then Order of the Phoenix comes along, you get a new director. You also get a new screenwriter, Michael Rosenberg, for that one. And I think it actually yields the best script in the entire franchise because it focuses more on dialogue rather than plot points. And then you bring Steve Kloves back for Half-Blood Prince, and it's like something awoke in him. He's like, all of a sudden, he's writing dialogue for character rather than plot. And I think that extends all the way through to Deathly Hallows Parts 1 and 2. So it avoids certain plot points, perhaps to very confusing results, and that's maybe some minor issues I have with it, but the way characters talk to one another, I think is really where this one works best, such as forgetting to celebrate Harry's birthday. Little things like that. You don't need it, but it's kind of what's required for these characters to interact and grow as this franchise goes.
Yeah, and even with when Harry and Hermione after the big fight with Ron, as we heard earlier, I was like, man, this is longer than I remembered. I'm like, yeah, it's whatever. But I only did it because I usually do like maybe 20-30 minute clips. I'm like, you know what? I mean, 20-30 minute second clips. I'm like, it's Harry Potter. Screw it. But it deserves all the time it needs.
Sure. Yeah.
But even with when Harry and Hermione go to Godric's Hollow, and it's kind of like she's like, Harry, I think it's Christmas Eve. Like it kind of just there's so much going on. They're going Horcrux hunting, and trying to hide themselves from the Death Eaters and Voldemort, and then their Snatchers as well. So there's so much around, and even with the wedding, it kind of just. Everyone's just constantly on the move, but they do take. There are certain points within part one where it's like, okay, we're going to slow down, even though, they move around a lot.
They do, and I do like the way that the film deliberately goes out of its way to avoid that exposition and moving the plot forward rather than moving the characters forward, as this film does. You mentioned when Harry and Hermione go to Godric's Hollow. There's a moment where Hermione finds this gravestone that looks like it could be very important to what they're hunting for. And then it gets completely interrupted by Harry finally finding his parents' gravestone. And it's like, okay, this is that moment where I realize this movie sees character as more important. And that's what I really love about it.
Yeah. Because, even with we don't really see a lot of, we see a lot of character growth between, the main three, but we also see a lot of turmoil, obviously, when, they're stressed, they're kind of just strung out on everything that's going on. They decided not to go back to Hogwarts. And even with Ron's character, he's constantly listening to the radio, and, it's kind of getting on Harry's nerves just a little bit, but obviously Hermione being the more reasonable one, she's like, well, there is a lot going on, but the reason why he keeps listening to the radio is to not hear his family's name, which is very, I mean, it's depressing, but it's like, what else can you honestly do? But I really like how obviously it is more focused on Harry, but I think so far, you know, we've come so far with these characters and just the character development, even just with Ron. Like, I know I've seen like a lot of people in the past saying, oh, you know, this is the one when Ron gets all pissy and like just
I think this is Rupert Grint's best performance in the franchise in this movie. I actually think if we're looking at each performance in each movie, I actually think it's one of the better performances from the entire franchise, honestly. I think it's up there with what Alan Rickman's doing in Deathly Hallows Part 2. It's up there with what Tom Felton was doing in Half-Blood Prince. I think those are probably the three individual performances from individual movies that I go to most often when I think, okay, should anything from a performance standpoint in these movies have garnered at least some awards consideration? Maybe not guaranteed nominations, but seriously contemplate on it. Because I think Rupert Grint is fantastic here. And I actually think in some ways he's the unsung hero. But they all deal with this sense of melancholy and grief in different ways, which arguably makes this perhaps the closest at being a real ensemble piece. And you can almost look at this whole experience from Ron's point of view and even from Hermione's point of view, and it sort of alters the experience for the viewer a little bit.
Yeah, because, I mean, you're going back and forth, and obviously, you know, everyone's first instinct is like, oh, you know, Harry's a protagonist. He's always right, like X, Y, and Z.
Sure.
It's like, well, not always, because you have to think about, you know, these side characters and how they support Harry and pretty much giving up, you know, their entire lives, you know, with the Polyjuice potion, like, and obviously Harry kind of stepping up saying like, no, you know, like I don't want anyone to risk their life for me. But I don't even think Harry realizes how serious it is in some ways. Like, he knows how serious, but it's like he refuses help. It's weird because, like, you know, he's obviously been having his hand held throughout the entire series.
He has, and this is the one where I feel like he finally starts to recognize that a little bit, or at least the movie is cueing the audience in a little bit at that. This is the one that I think comes closest to sort of deconstructing the whole chosen one narrative in a way, and it shows how important Ron and especially Hermione are to Harry's success. Because in a lot of ways, Hermione's kind of the one that figures out a lot of the puzzles along the way that Dumbledore left breadcrumbs for them for. And the movie's very much aware of that.
Yeah, and talk about those breadcrumbs, man. They were like sawdust pieces.
They were so sneaky. But in a way, I kind of like that's something that I feel like is I haven't read the books in a while, but I feel like that's something that was slightly different in the book versus the movie, is that it was those breadcrumbs were much larger pieces of bread than they are in the movies, which I think adds a bit more realism to it. You know, the fact that not everything could have been so planned, that Harry and his friends at least had to figure some stuff out themselves to make their own way. And I think that contributes to the whole coming of age aspect of this whole franchise. Yeah,
because I mean, you know, they don't have the support system of Hogwarts anymore. You know, obviously, you know, you have Ron's parents and Hermione's parents, honestly, probably have no clue what's going on. But then again, it's, you know, you can kind of see, like, even with the papers that they're constantly reading, it shows, you know, like a Muggle family killed and whatnot. And it's very, they really literally are on their own. And obviously Hermione's always there to save the day. And Ron even mentions it in part 1 when Harry tries to leave on his own once he gets to the new Weasley house. And he's like, you know, I need to do this on my own. And Ron's like, oh, I'll come with you. And then he's like, oh, he's going to leave Hermione. He's like, well, we're not going to last without Hermione. Like, it's like Ron's finally starting to get it. He's like you said, he's really starting to come into his own here and be his own character. And I really like it. I mean, I can kind of understand how Ron can be frustrated, but obviously with the pendant, the Horcrux.
Yeah, that's influencing him in a way that it's almost like the ring,
right? Yeah,
Lord of the Rings. It's not that it's creating this angst in him; it's simply like enhancing that sense of angst that he's carrying as a burden, and it's basically making more light of that. It's emphasizing that further, and that negativity is really what that Horcrux is doing. It's emphasizing that.
Yeah, and speaking of the Horcrux, I've always enjoyed the I think it's around like 4 or 5 minute scene of explaining what the Deathly Hallows are.
Oh, that animated sequence? Yeah.
Yeah,
this is a surprisingly artful film. I've used that word a few times, and that sequence is stunning.
Yeah, it's so like, it's like, ooh, like story time, you know?
It is, yeah. It almost feels kind of Tim Burton-esque in a way, the animation style, but not in a way that feels like a ripoff or anything. It actually still has a voice of its own. But yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, and even with, you keep seeing the Deathly Hallows symbol throughout the entire first part of the series, and even at the wedding, where they are just trying to have a wedding amongst all this, and it still gets interrupted. And it's like the days of even just trying to go back to some kind of normalcy are kind of over.
Yeah, that's what I like about this film that I feel like is well carried over from Half-Blood Prince. You realize in Half-Blood Prince, a lot of the Death Eaters really don't do anything outside of scaring our main characters. Like, some people have argued that they might be kind of silly and dumb and threatless, but that's something I kind of like about them in that movie, is that they're making their presence known in a way that they're saving their skills for later at a more important time. And that sense of threat looming in the background is always there. And they're sort of doing the same thing here with this wedding. You have characters trying to retain a sense of normalcy. In the last film, it was, rooted in teenage romance in a John Hughes kind of way. And here it's a more sophisticated kind of way, such as a wedding as an example. And you definitely feel that battle. It's a very introspective one.
Yeah, and it's with the wedding, and even I think one of my favorite scenes, and when I was in high school, I didn't really care for it, but obviously, rewatching these, God knows how many times. The just the scene between Harry and Hermione after Ron has left, when they're kind of just dancing, and it shows how it just shows, they address in Half-Blood Prince about the relationship between Hermione and Harry, because Dumbledore was asking him. And he's like, oh, no, like, we're just friends. And this really kind of, everyone's like, well, I don't know, whatever. This really solidified it, because obviously, like, Ron is the man the friend who got out of the friend zone, essentially. The boy who got out of the friend zone. And, Hermione obviously has those strong feelings for Ron. But I really just like how even, they're both stressed out. Ron's gone. They have no clue where to find the Sword of Gryffindor #1 after they, received their last, after Dumbledore's last willing testament there. And it was it was just nice. But when I was in high school, I was like, I do not like this at all. But now I'm like, it's a nice little scene.
At the time when we're younger experiencing it, we might first think, oh, this is hinting at some sense of romanticism, but it really isn't. It's anything but that. And it's not because Half-Blood Prince, with that scene involving Dumbledore and Harry, goes out of its way to establish how platonic that Harry and Hermione's relationship is. No, you watch it now. There is something very platonic about that dance scene that they have together. It's more of a way of trying to distract themselves from the outside world for just a brief moment. And it's two friends trying to do that for each other. I love that about it. I think the scene's great. I don't care what some book purists say about hating it. I have a lot of
it's crazy.
I have a lot of book purist friends. I hate to use that word. That's too negative, because they have good thoughts on some of these films as adaptations and how they sometimes don't work as adaptations. I get that. I think that's fair. But they don't like this scene simply because it wasn't in the book. And that's kind of a dull argument, if you ask me.
Yeah, because there's a lot of scenes that, when it comes to adaptation, especially for Harry Potter, it's like you have to figure out what works and what doesn't. Like I said on a few podcast episodes ago, I think it was during Goblet of Fire, when I asked everyone, like, do you think that Goblet of Fire should have been split into part 1, part 2, same as like Order of the Phoenix? Because those are like ginormous books. And then I believe Amy Smith was saying that, like, it would be cool, but like, these kids are going to be like in their 30s by the time that everything gets done and is over with. So you kind of have to cut corners, and not everything translates well from page onto screen. And like you see that in Game of Thrones as well.
I'm one of those people that prefers adaptations that are a bit looser rather than more faithful, because if it's going to be so faithful to the point that it's like you're just seeing a visualized version of what you've already read, I'm just going to reread the book again.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I feel like that happens a lot with certain book fans. They tend to argue that something doesn't work in a movie because it wasn't in the book. And a lot of times their argument is it doesn't add anything. And I'm using quotes around that. When in actuality, what they mean is it was replaced by something in the book that I actually wanted to see instead. And that happens all the time. I love that sequence of Hermione and Harry dancing, more specifically. And it also made me a big fan of Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. You know, because I did not know that song beforehand. I heard that song, I loved it, and now I'm a big Nick Cave fan.
Nice. Yeah, and it's so and it's been a while since I've reread the books myself, so I'm trying to figure out what was actually mentioned, but I just really enjoy how the adaptations have been, because I have so many friends who've never even read the books who are big Harry Potter fans, and that's totally fine. It just, even my friend Amanda, she didn't get into Harry Potter until like later, like, yeah. So it's like, it is what it is, but even with like Hunger Games, things like that, people are like, oh, well, X, Y, and Z didn't happen in the movie, therefore it's bad. And I read the Giver book when I was in, it's such a good book.
I love that book so much.
It was so good. But I didn't care too much for the movie, but I'm like, it's an adaptation. Maybe this medium of the story isn't for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. I love that book so much. I'd actually like to read that one again at some point, just for something fun, a little bit lighter, and a little bit more easier to digest. But as far as the Harry Potter franchise working as adaptations, I think for the most part they do a great job. In some cases, I've actually preferred the films over their book counterparts.
Sometimes I do too. Yeah.
Yeah, like I a lot of them that were helmed by David Yates, I've actually preferred those films over their book counterparts, because I think he's able to simplify a lot of things. I think about The Order of the Phoenix, for instance. That book, I think, it's just so discombobulated, if you ask me. It's so long to the point that I feel like every subplot feels equally as important, and I don't think that should be the case. The movie rightfully focuses more on Harry's desire to become more of a leader for his fellow peers, the conflict with Dolores Umbridge. So I think the movie does a better job centralizing those things. And I think that's an example of one that surpasses its book counterpart.
Oh, for sure. And I actually did I did a book report on The Order of the Phoenix when it first came out. I failed it so hard.
Oh my gosh, really?
There was so much. And I can't remember exactly what the assignment was, but it was essentially like a review of the book. And
okay,
my teacher, she was like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, "I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. I can do it." I bombed it so hard, because there's so much in that book, and it's like you said, with all the little subplots and whatnot, and like it kind of felt like I was like reading like a George R. R. Martin book in a way, but it's like. With him, it's more everything's there for a reason, but I don't know. Maybe it was just too much for everything that was happening in Harry Potter at the time.
Yeah, it almost felt as if that J.K. Rowling realized that each book she's been writing has been getting longer and longer and longer, so she had to somehow find a way to keep that trajectory going. And I think in the case of Order of the Phoenix, the book, I think that worked against her. I actually think it works very well in Goblet of Fire. That's one of my favorite books in the franchise.
Same.
Or series. I'll call it series for novels. I think that's a better term for it. But I think that one rightfully earns its almost Bible-like length. And it tells a great story in the process, too.
Yeah, it really, really does. And of course, we're talking about Deathly Hallows Part 1. We kind of get the, I do really. I hate bringing up Dobby's death because that the whole Malfoy Manor.
It is
scene,
both my favorite and least favorite death sequence in the whole franchise because it is so devastating.
It is. Bella. Bellatrix Lestrange. Ever since you meet her, and it's in Is it in Goblet
It's in
of Fire?
Order of the Phoenix.
Order of the Phoenix.
Yeah.
She just goes ham, especially in, of course, Half-Blood Prince. She's setting things on fire.
God love Helena Bonham Carter.
Like, yeah.
But here she's throwing knives at house elves. I mean, okay, now you're taking it too far. I mean, you already took it pretty
come on. It's like, the game-winning pitch.
Not only do you kill Sirius Black, you torment Harry with it, and even before that, you perform the Cruciatus Curse on Neville Longbottom's parents to the point that they suffered heavily because of it. I mean, there is nothing redeemable about this character, but that's what makes her compelling.
Yeah, and she carves mudblood into Hermione's arm for.
Oh gosh, yeah.
So it's. I really like, because when I was rewatching it, I was like, okay, like I know X, Y, and Z happens. And, when between Ron coming back for part 1 and him, kind of just, I guess, in a way, cooling off, when they finally destroy the pendant. So as of right now, the diary's been destroyed, and then Voldemort's mother's ring's been destroyed. And then we have the pendant. Was something else, or was that?
No, it was just those 3. And this is where I think the movie does get a little confusing, but the details are actually there, because in Half-Blood Prince, the memory of the Horcrux shows a young Tom Riddle saying something like, is it possible to split the soul into, say, 7 pieces? And in the book, that meant 7 Horcruxes. But in the movie, that alludes to 6 Horcruxes, with the 7th being his own soul himself, his own body. So that's where we destroy 3 in part 1, and then Ron at one point says, just think, only 3 to go. So that's where
that's why I was confused. I was going to ask you. I was like, wait, I was sitting there counting. I'm like, that's not right.
Because in actuality, it was 7 Horcruxes. So you would think, wait, there's supposed to be 4 left.
But we didn't know at the time Harry was a Horcrux.
Yeah, but I think in the book, and again, it's been a while since I've read them. So if one of your listeners is listening right now, maybe correct me if I'm wrong. You can find me at Brendan J. Cassidy on Twitter. I could have sworn that there was this allusion to a 7th Horcrux that they didn't know what it was yet. Like there's something like that. But here, I feel like the movies are trying to establish that it's 6 Horcruxes and 7 total souls, but one of those is going to be Voldemort himself.
And I really like the going back to what Voldemort trying to figure out how to destroy Harry, because Harry's wand and his wand are essentially brothers. They're twins. They came from the same being. So I really love. I mean, just a chase sequence during the beginning when when Voldemort finally they figure out which Harry's the real one, because Hedwig kind of gives it away. And then Hagrid kind of gets knocked out, and then you hear like that high pitched scratching noise type, like it's like, I like that noise because it's like it really shows you the pain that Harry is going through, instead of just being like, oh, like my scar is hurting and I'm showing them in pain. Like we can actually hear and it's irritating.
It is.
And it's like, okay, that is what has been going on in Harry's head this entire time. But when Harry kind of gets knocked out, and then he I don't know, like Otto like raises his wand, and like they have like that nice little power struggle thing. It's like, it's so nice. And then of course, Voldemort takes Lucius Malfoy's wand, and it kind of like goes to that little crack, and it just destroys. I'm like, oh, that was amazing. Loved it.
It's really interesting stuff. There's something very snake-like about those sound effects that I think are very, very appropriate. And it adds to the unnerving quality of this movie. I often say that Half-Blood Prince and Deathly Hallows Part 1 are the 2 that come closest to being horror films. And Half-Blood Prince, especially with the cinematography by Bruno Delbonnel, has almost like a gothic British horror aesthetic to it, and this one feels a bit more vast and open, but it's still very haunting because of that.
Yeah, especially when they get to Godric's Hollow, when they meet the woman that's kind of just like following them. And
that edit when she's just standing there next to them, that is really creepy.
Yeah, I was like, what? And like when I first saw it, I was like, who is this woman? Like, this isn't the same woman from Order of the Phoenix. And, she just doesn't say a sound. And then she kind of gets all decrepit, and it's Nagini, like that whole house horror thing. That was actually pretty sweet, when
it really does a great job committing to not just the sadness of the source material, but the horrific elements of what's actually going on in this world. Like this is not the kind of blockbuster you see greenlit all the time nowadays. There is something very devastating and sophisticated about it. This is a very hard PG-13, probably the hardest of any of them, but I think it's the right story to do that for.
Yeah, we haven't seen a lot of PG-13, this edginess. I mean, we saw it a little bit in Endgame when Thanos' head gets kind of chopped off, but that's a little bit there, but it's so like you don't get franchises like this anymore.
Yeah, and it's not just what you physically see. Sometimes it's just about the overall aura of the film, and the way that this film just feels so slow and methodical. And I mentioned the word haunting before. That sometimes makes some of the acts of violence even more harrowing for certain audiences to see, because it leaves you with this kind of grungy feeling, and that's what I really respect about this one.
Yeah, because it's like hauntingly beautiful in a way, because it's like, things are not well. These characters are essentially depressed. They're worn out. They're tired. They're anxious. They're not getting the proper sleep because they're constantly looking over their shoulder, and it's just pretty much the entire movie Harry, Ron, Hermione on the run and just trying to figure things out on the way. And it's very stressful. Like,
and I still miss Dobby so much.
I love how when they're finally capturing Malfoy Manor, and you see this struggle with Draco himself, and like he after Hermione like deforms Harry's face, he knows it's him. It's like, dude, Ron and Hermione are standing right there. Like, who else could this be? Who else is this going to be? Yeah.
But the point is that even though it's obvious, he still doesn't say anything, even though it's a failed attempt at, weirdly protecting them. It's the attempt that matters. And the arc of Draco Malfoy from the last movie, the last one being the one before this, Half-Blood Prince, into Deathly Hallows Part 2 is very interesting. Tom Felton's doing some really interesting things, even with very little lines of dialogue.
Yeah. And like we had said, and I think Sharia brought it up, it's not what Malfoy says in Half-Blood Prince. It's more of his actions. And anytime he's on screen, you can just see, what he's battling with. And he's like, crap, why was I chosen to do all of this stuff? And within Deathly Hallows, his family's already hung high strung enough. Everything was happening with Malfoy's father, and they're obviously very tied. And I believe Bellatrix is related to Malfoy. Is she not?
I think that's Draco's mom's sister, I believe.
So Bellatrix is also related to Sirius, isn't she? Isn't he?
In some way, yeah. They never mention it in the movie. They do mention that there is, or actually, do they mention it in Order of the Phoenix that it's her distant? It's his distant cousin.
Yeah, because she's on the family tree wall.
Yeah, so that's something that Order of the Phoenix never mentions. That
right.
They show it. They allude to it when we find out that Bellatrix Lestrange is also related to the Malfoys, and that's how Sirius is also related to the Malfoys in some way. Yeah. But the movies don't directly say that, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. No. They don't. They, like you said, they do allude to it. And I was drawing a blank because I was like, oh yeah, she's Malfoy's sister, but I'm like, she's also related to Sirius in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. I think that's Draco's aunt. Again, listeners, correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a while since I've read all of this stuff, and I think a lot of that's more elaborated on in the novels. Yeah, and
as much as I like, if I could, I would like reread them every single year. It's just all these movies, man. I swear, it's like, and it's award season. It's like my friend's like, "Oh, have you checked out Arcane yet?" I'm like, "No, but I want to. It looks amazing." I actually have finished one episode, and I want to keep watching, but it's like we rarely during this time. It's like you can rarely watch something just for pleasure because
I know It's so
I'm
annoying.
like, I'll get to it eventually. You know,
unless it's Harry
January
Potter, and then we can watch something for pleasure.
Exactly. It's like, so that's when you make your own movie series. Like, you know what? We're gonna make this okay. We're gonna put this in the schedule. But for Bellatrix Lestrange, like even her kind of just interrogating Hermione and like that scream that she lets out.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, it always sends like chills down my spine because you don't necessarily see it. You kind of see her. I thought she was kind of like sucking the blood out of her or whatever. But then
she was like acting all like vampira on her or something. It was really weird in a good way, but really weird
because you don't like physically see it until after, and it's like it just says mudblood, and you know there's a lot of and of course with all the melancholy stuff, there is the funny, the
is a funny
small
movie.
little things, but like we said in Half-Blood Prince, that movie is still extremely funny, but I would have to say for Deathly Hallows Part 1, probably my favorite part is when they're infiltrating the Ministry of Magic. And then
that's pretty good. Ron, you don't have a wife.
What am I going to do? My wife's all alone downstairs.
I often think about the actors who have to play these other characters, but still in as these characters they were hired to play in the first place. It's like this weird concoction. How awkward that must be on set.
Yeah, I mean, even with the mouth movement, it was pretty spot on. Like, it didn't feel out of place.
Yeah, I'm guessing these actors probably have to deliver the lines of dialogue themselves, and then it's probably in post-production is when you have Daniel, Rupert, and Emma coming back in to try and match it in some way that they can that's most appropriate.
Yeah, because even with Harry's like multiple apologies potion, it was pretty spot on. But yeah, that was definitely, they just hijack these three like witches and wizards and trying to go into the Ministry of Magic in the in the toilet.
Gosh. It's so whimsical. It's so weird,
but
I
love disgusting. I'm like, it is.
and that's what I like about these movies, especially when David Yates came on board, is that there are certain movies in this franchise that got either more whimsical and some a bit more grounded, but David Yates, I think, did a great job kind of bridging those two tones and aesthetics together in a way that really felt seamless. And I think this one and Half-Blood Prince, Order of the Phoenix as well, they even Part 2, Deathly Hallows Part 2, even despite that being mostly spectacle, these all do that very well. He's a very good director, at least working with this material. Yeah,
I mean, it's great how he's able to balance the serious with the funny. It's not all jokes, but when, and sometimes they kind of pop up. And you have oh my gosh, I think it was either Fred or George right before the wedding when Ginny and Harry are kind of like sharing a moment.
Morning.
And he just sits.
I think it was Fred because it wasn't it Fred the one that suffered the ear injury?
Yeah. And he's just sitting there like, what's up?
Yeah.
He's like giving Harry, like, he's like,
yeah. It's like, that's my sister, yo.
Yeah, but it's like like more so. He was like obviously it's Harry, and he's like, okay, I see you guys over there, canoodling about. But yeah, the humor, the British humor, of course, it's always there, and it's always welcome. So
it's very awkward in a way that I really like.
It's so dry. It's like the driest humor in the world, but it's so funny.
It really is.
Gotta love it. But sorry, my voice is kind of giving out here, but I wanted to throw it back to you to see if there was anything else you wanted to bring up for our Deathly Hallows Part 1 review before we close out.
I will say a few things. This is the one, I get that it's a long movie. There's so much to cram in already, but have you seen the deleted scenes for this one specifically?
I have. One in particular was the extended scene with Dudley during the very beginning.
Yeah. There's also the extended scene with Aunt Petunia.
That's right. Yeah.
There's also the one moment that Harry, Ron, and Hermione have in the tent where Ron realizes the name Voldemort is taboo. That if they say it, that's what triggers people to know where they are.
That's right.
Yeah. So there are little things like that I kind of wish I really wish that this movie found a way to include them. It's not that it's messy or anything without it, but some of those sequences, especially with the Dursley saying goodbye to them, like that's a really tender scene that Harry has with Dudley when he says, "You're not I don't think you're a waste of space." And I wish they were able to find some way to make it work. I don't know why. Maybe there were some post-production issues that, prevented that from happening. But I wanted to make note of that I feel like this is the one that has the biggest fault in forgoing certain things that I really wish made it into the final cut.
Yeah, because we don't really see a lot of, there's not a lot of extended cuts for this. I think there is one for Sorcerer's Stone and for Chamber of Secrets, but it's only like an extra scene or two.
Yeah, there is, if you watch it on television, this one specifically, some of those sequences, like the one where Harry and Aunt Petunia have together in the house before they say goodbye, that's in the extended cut on television.
Okay.
It wasn't in the theatrical cut, if I'm not mistaken, where she says, "You didn't just lose a mother that night, I lost a sister." And I think that's a great scene, but that one, the work had already been done. I feel like that one was way easier to reinsert in post-production. But some of these other ones were just too unfinished. But yeah, some of these did make it into some extended cut on television. I don't know if it exists anywhere physically.
Yeah, I don't think it does either, because they just re-released. I mean, even though, we're celebrating 20 years of magic, they've really been pushing, obviously, the first film because it's the 20th anniversary of the first film.
Yeah.
Which, it's fine. But obviously, when it comes to Harry Potter, you can't just watch one.
You can't. No, you gotta watch them all. And unfortunately, you notice some of these little small things that you can nitpick. And even if you want to call them nitpicks, I don't even know if that's a fair word for it. But I often think about at the end, at Malfoy Manor, that final confrontation before the end of the movie, we find out that, we find this out in part 2, that the way that Harry earns the right to the Elder Wand is because he disarms Malfoy in Malfoy Manor. But here, if you notice, the way he disarms him is by simply just running up to him and grabbing his wand. Yeah, which I don't think is right. That feels like morally incorrect. I don't buy that the Elder Wand would change its allegiance for an action like that.
It's like, hey, bro, you fought me for it.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a little. I think that was a little clumsy. Just the way that's executed.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. When within the books, I'm sure it's like I said, it's been a while. And I really, it is like even this rewatch series has been edging me to just reread the books again. But it's like I just don't have any. Like I started rereading the Golden Compass.
Okay,
got halfway through, and then I started reading one of the Witcher books. I got a little halfway through, so I'm like, I've all this unfinished stuff. So I'm like. There's never enough time in the day.
There's never enough time, but if there's ever a bright side, you're never going to run out of material to and entertain yourself with.
That is very true. It's like I have it for when I'm bored. For when I need it, it's there. I mean,
it's always
have Harry Potter books on audio, so it's
okay.
It's great stuff. I just love experiencing it in different ways for sure. Yeah, it's but yeah, pretty much. I guess closing thoughts for me. R.I.P. Dobby again. Yeah. It really just kills me every time because I think it is the same voice actor from.
It's not. I actually looked that up. It is someone slightly different. I think. Actually, now that we're mentioning this, I'm going to look this up. But if you want to continue your closing thoughts there, I'm going to look this up quickly.
Oh no, you're fine. Yeah, it is like we said. It's a calm before the storm. It is. It's just I love how mature and how hauntingly beautiful and like. Brendan said, very melancholy this film is, just because even everything with like Luna's father, how desperate he is to get his daughter back, and it's the severity of it, and it's like it is like it's coming, like we are near the end of this grand adventure, and it's a bittersweet thing but I've always, and I kind of mentioned it in our Half-Blood Prince review, you would think, oh, go ahead.
It was the same actor for Dobby. Apparently it was Toby Jones for both Chamber of Secrets and Deathly Hallows Part 1. Where I was getting confused was that we actually get a different actor playing the Goblin from Gringotts.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a different actor.
Right.
Because I think it was Vern Troyer in Sorcerer's Stone or Philosopher's Stone, and I think it was, I'm just trying to remember off the bat here. I think it was the same actor that played Flitwick that also played the Goblin. Then again, I'm kind of spitballing here. Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone listening. And I might learn my mistake by the time this airs. But yeah, I thought it was someone different for Dobby, but I guess it was the same actor. I'm going to look this up further, so you can keep talking.
No, okay, no, yeah. So yeah, it's everything with Dobby and just the entire story itself. Like it, like, and everyone always asks, like, what is your favorite like film franchise of all time? And I, like, for the longest time I didn't know, because I mean, obviously Harry Potter I've always rewatched, but it's like I didn't know what they meant by favorite. Was it the one that I can kind of just turn on in the background and do whatever, or is it just the one that I thoroughly just enjoy the adventure? But after weeks and weeks of reviewing these on the podcast, like, I mean, Harry Potter's always been there for me. So it is unequivocally Harry Potter 100% with all of its flaws. But they're not
perfect, but that's fine.
Yeah, and I mean, unless you're Lord of the Rings, what film franchise what film franchise is, to be completely honest with you? But just the love and care J.K. has brought into so many people's lives. When it's just I've known a lot of people who've gone through a tough time, and Harry Potter was kind of there to comfort them and get help them get through those tough times. But Deathly Hallows Part 1 is where we're near the end. It's every time it kills me every time. I love how grand and just it's a very daunting film, but it's also very beautiful, because
it is very beautiful. Like, the cinematography here is gorgeous. It's one of the best looking Harry Potter films, if you ask me.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and I love that they're very artful. They take themselves very seriously, despite them being commercial blockbusters of a sort.
Yeah, I mean, of course, Warner Brothers is going to be milking this to the day. I don't know, but we're getting a 20th anniversary reunion type celebration thing. So I read into it. I mean, it's a lot of people are going to be involved in this, but I don't believe J.K. Rowling will be there for recent events, excuse me, within these past few years, honestly, and for probably just for the best, to be completely honest. So it's, but it is what it is. I'm very excited for that. Don't know how long it's going to be, but I like these reunion things that they're doing. They're essentially a trend right now, because this is the third one that Warner Brothers is pumping out, because they did one for Friends. Right. They did one for Fresh Prince, which I actually like that one better than one from Friends. Just because it was more intimate and not. Yeah. But
I didn't watch the Fresh Prince one. I did watch the Friends reunion, and I thought it was okay. I don't know. I felt something weirdly disingenuous about it. Even when they were being interviewed by James Corden, Corden, I believe it was. Something about it felt scripted. Like, it didn't feel authentic.
Yeah, I encourage you to watch the Fresh Prince reunion. It's just, it's very wholesome and very just, it's literally only the actors and actresses on set. They kind of walk in one by one. They haven't seen each other in God knows. I'm sure how it is with Friends, but there's just more. It felt more of a sense of like family and community.
Sure. For
the Fresh Prince over the Friends one, because the Friends one felt more like a celebration, and then the Fresh Prince felt more like a reunion, essentially.
Yeah,
like an actual reunion. So
yeah,
we'll see what the Harry Potter one brings. So I think that comes out January 1st.
I think so. That's how we ring in the new year.
Yeah, hungover and
hungover.
I'll be in my
new
bedroom.
Year indeed.
I'll be in my bedroom doing absolutely nothing, pretending I
there you
exist. Go. But my gosh, it's sad that JD wasn't here with us to help us close out. But hey, I believe he's going to be on for part 2. I think
That's
so.
great, yeah. And I know he is a big fan of part one. I don't want to speak for him, but I do think he also, I mean, again, if we're ranking part one and part two as individual films, which might not really be fair to do, I think he also slightly prefers part one over part two for a lot of the same reasons we talked about here. He and I think alike on apparently everything. We rarely ever argue, and that's kind of an in-joke with us and as well as all of our listeners at In Session Film. But in this case, I think he and I are kind of in sync on Deathly Hallows part one.
Okay. Actually, so I lied. It's Jay Ledbetter.
Oh, the other
not,
Jay.
Not JD. See, I'm getting everyone's name. I called you JD on the other podcast. It's crazy. Yeah.
Are you getting Ryan for that one as well?
Yeah. So it's Ryan J. Ledbetter. I told him he's going to come on this podcast and talk here. It would be a huge disservice not to have him on because I know he's a big Harry Potter fan as well.
Yeah, because you had Ryan on as well at least once. It was for Prisoner of Azkaban, right?
Yeah. Jay was supposed to come on for, I think it was Order of the Phoenix. Either Order of the Phoenix or Goblet of Fire, but he wasn't able to. So I was like, yeah, I mean, like I'll try to have you on and whatnot. So yeah, it'll be Nicole Ackman, Ryan, and Jay Ledbetter.
Oh man, you're getting the extra film boys from In Session Film.
My dream was to get the entire In Session and extra film on at least one of the last two, but
okay, yeah, good thing it wasn't on the same episode. Otherwise, you'd be dealing with a 3-hour show.
You know what? There's no better way to close out Harry Potter, to be completely honest.
That's fair. That's actually a good point.
But yeah, again, thank you so much, Brendan, for coming on. You know, it's been an honor. You know, it's been a pleasure having you on. But definitely love to have you on for whatever other future episodes, you know, we may do here on the show.
Yeah, I'd love to.
But I just want to give the chance for you to let everyone know where they can find you on the internet and what is coming up on the In Session Film podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So everything you can find with us is at InSessionFilm.com, all of our written content, which includes some of your great work as well, Christian. And our podcast content, you can find the main show there, where myself and JD Duran review mostly a new release, maybe a few movie series in there that we find time for. We just wrapped up talking about both Belfast, Kenneth Branagh's new film, as well as Passing, the Rebecca Hall film starring Tessa Thompson and Ruth Negga. So we had a bit of a black and white themed episode of sorts. This weekend, we're planning on talking about King Richard, which should be a lot of fun. We're getting heavily in the swing of Oscar season. So that's what you can find there on the main show with myself and JD Duran. We also have our extra film episodes with Ryan McQuaid and Jay Ledbetter. They talk about smaller films, indies, as well as old movie series with certain directors and genre movements and things like that. They're currently in the middle of their Sergio Leone movie series.
Yeah. See, I've been listening to that one. And
oh, man.
I never watched them. But like half of the films that they talk about in extra film, I've never watched. But I just enjoy the conversation.
The conversations are great. I will say, if you start anywhere, if you've never seen some of the films they talk about in a lot of their respective movie series, definitely do Leone, because you'll hear a lot of things in those movies that you'll recognize from other movies. Like if you watch The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and you hear that musical theme, you'll be thinking, oh, Quentin Tarantino used this so much. I've heard this before. Yeah, so it's great stuff. But yeah, everything you can find there at InSessionFilm.com. You can also find me on Twitter at Brendan J. Cassidy for all the crazy tweets I do.
All right. Yeah. And of course, all that information of the website and Brendan's Twitter page is all in